I sort of hate this idea that can you be a tour guide for your culture to a white audience, to a Western audience, and I don't think that BIPOC authors should have to write from that perspective. Do you think publishing is still worth trying for as AI becomes more common? If you're like a new writer, you can fall into this trap of thinking that you can't imagine being able to brainstorm, plot, world build without asking whatever writing tool, ChatGPT, whatever. Girl. Yeah. Hi, how are we doing? Can we just appreciate this green light, this literal green light in the back of the green light behind the shelf? The green light illuminating Nanami. Before we get started, guess what I have? This is a finished North American copy of Local Heavens. I actually really love the spine. But yeah, Local Heavens has a metallic finish. It shines bright like a diamond. Really, really beautiful. And I hope you guys love it. All the links to pre-order and stuff like that is in the description box. 2 bookstores are offering signed and personalized copies. If you want to pre-order Local Heavens and get it signed and personalized by me, you can do that from Queen Books in Toronto, as well as You and Me Books in Manhattan. We also announced our pre-order campaign. So if you do pre-order a US or a UK edition, you can submit your receipts to the correct Google form. Again, that will be linked below. And we will send you some free stuff, some free goodies, bookmarks, signed book plates. For the US edition, you'll also be entered into a raffle to like win more stuff. The UK pre-order incentives are first come, first serve. Depending on how many people submit their receipts, I might run out of stuff. I don't know if this will like stay put. I'm a little worried this is gonna fall ominously in the middle of the video. Should we just live life on the edge and see what happens? That's looking a little scary. My laptop's gonna die. What's new? Girl. Yeah. What is a piece of advice do you believe new writers need to hear? Number 1 is do not be obsessed with publishing young. I think that this just goes for like anything and any kind of accomplishment. And I really hate this idea that accomplishments are somehow worth less once you're past the age of 30 or 40 or whatever. It is never too late to just like start over and reinvent yourself. I think right now there is this like focus on writing as an aesthetic instead of writing as a practice. It's like need to write fast, to publish young, monetize that writing art, whatever, only has value for its end product. And I think it's really important to take the time to figure out what kind of stories really speak to you, really define you. Writing especially is the kind of thing that you absolutely do get better at with age. Everyone just kind of wants to be a prodigy, right? That's how you burn out. You burn out really, really, really fast. For longevity's sake and to have like a really healthy relationship with writing, kind of just gotta like listen to your body, listen to your soul. Someone commented on one of my shorts recently where they were quoting something that Shaylin said in one of their videos about how whatever they're writing is kind of a summary of what question they are fixated on at any given point in their life. And I think that is absolutely how I feel about my own writing as well. The other thing I would say is get used to critique and remember that writing is mostly revising. People think they've written the book and then it's done and it's over. When in reality, I think a story really goes from bad to good and good to great in revision. What is the most unexpected thing you've learned from the publication process with Local Heavens? Every day is a roller coaster. The thing to remember is that as a debut author, I'm like going through everything for the first time. So pretty much like everything is unexpected and new for me. Obviously, the first thing, which I feel like is something that a lot of authors feel, number 1 is I've been surprised by how many people are involved in the lifespan of one book. Like there are so many people that play a role in making a book successful, like from editorial to production to marketing and publicity. Every time you see a book on a shelf, just know that there was no less than like 20 people involved in putting that book in your bookstore. I can't speak to like other types of publishing, but I think traditional publishing, especially because there's just like so many touch points, it's a deeply collaborative experience. A lot of why I have enjoyed this collaborative experience is because I really like my publisher, and I have been very anxious leading up to release, and there has been these intense like ups and downs. Like there's like some days, some weeks where I'm just like so excited and so happy, and then there's just like other weeks where like your energy, it's like a come down, like you just like your energy just completely tanks. Yeah, I think the focus issues that I have had between separating publishing tasks and writing tasks, that has been really, really difficult. I haven't really been able to like focus creatively as much as I want to. But I think this is where like a support system really comes in handy. Okay, so I kind of bunched together, I think, two different questions. One of them is, if one wants to write a book that they don't necessarily want to promote on their own socials, is that possible with TradPub? I'm writing a queer story, yet I'm closeted to everyone I know. I also got a question that was, sorry if this is a weird question, but when you talk about writing Filipino characters, did you ever feel pressured to write your Filipino identity a certain way, like to justify it or infuse your culture into it? I'm queering soon, and my main character is BIPOC like me, but wondering if that needs to be in the query letter because her culture isn't really a part of the story. You know, OwnVoices was started as this initiative for readers and publishers to understand that it is important for people from a marginalized identity to be able to tell their own stories. There was a lot of backlash to this idea of someone who is outside of a culture telling the traumas and profiting off of those narratives while not being directly affected by them and not having that firsthand experience. And so it started this whole discussion about own voices, which is very, very important. On the flip side of it, there is this pressure for marginalized authors to be forced to market from their identity and to see that identity as something that is just a marketing talking point. One thing that I do think is interesting is that I think it was an agent who I was talking to at one point where they said, I would love to see just like more of Nick's Filipino culture in the book. And I remember hearing that comment. It felt very strange for a BIPOC character to have to justify their existence in a story. It's like a Filipino character in a book can't just be Filipino. It's like, and can we see more of that? Again, it's not that I disagree with the feedback, because I think I did end up, you know, writing in more of that into the story, but it was something that happened not as a result of me going, how can I make the book more Filipino? It came as a result of me thinking about like, okay, what is Nick's arc? How does he move through the world? I sort of hate this idea that BIPOC writers have to be like put into these boxes. Can you be a tour guide for your culture to a white audience, to a Western audience? And I don't think that BIPOC authors should have to write from that perspective. To answer the first part of the question, this issue of queer writers who are closeted having to come out because readers or whoever are bullying them, while it is difficult for authors to be completely faceless, I also think that if you focus on writing a story, making it as good as you can make it, and that story is good and you're passionate about it, like you can have that discussion with your agent eventually. If you get an offer on the book, like I wouldn't let that stop you from pursuing traditional publishing. If you find an agent who really, really likes your work, I would like to think that it's not impossible for that agent to say, hey, I understand you want to write under a pen name, you want to be faceless, you want to be anonymous. I will work with you on that. I do think it is harder. I do think it is why many anonymous authors choose to go the indie route, but it is definitely not impossible. But I would say just focus on writing the book that you want to write and worry about the publishing stuff later. At the end of the day, I think readers need to understand that like real people, they do not owe an explanation about their personal information, their sexuality, anything. And I think this like witch hunt culture relating to like outing people especially is just really, really, really harmful. Do you think publishing is still worth trying for as AI becomes more common? We need real human stories now more than ever. If you read a lot and if you write a lot, you can very easily tell what is AI. The only way that our art is ever going to survive is if there is a concerted effort on both the publishing side, the author side, the reader side, to reject AI generated content as a replacement for real human art. I've also made a video about AI I made last year, and people weren't happy about that. I think that there's so many, the AI argument is so frustrating because I think that there's this kind of like adapt or get left behind mentality that people have where it's just like, well, it's here, so accept it. Just accept that it's going to take over everything. And I think the thing that this argument is always missing is that it's not that generative AI is something that we should completely throw away, throw into the trash. It's that as it exists right now, it is unregulated, it is pervasive, it's poisoning towns in America, it's harmful to the environment, stealing artists' work against their permission, without their knowledge. It is also just weaseling its way into every part of our technology, into, academic institutions. These are things that people have so easily become apathetic to. Always like convenience at any cost. Any kind of expression of empathy and compassion for these issues is sort of seen as like, too bad, More than anything, what is really upsetting is this sort of normalization of apathy. And especially now, if you're like a new writer, you can fall into this trap of thinking that the tool is here and it's so easy to use, and then you grow dependent on it. Can't imagine being able to brainstorm, plot, world build without asking whatever writing tool, ChatGPT, whatever, what do I do next? It's crazy to me that what makes writing is the thing that we want to just outsource. Writing is way more than the writing itself. And this is something that I talked about in my AI video, where there's this like fundamental lack of understanding about what it is to create art, what it is to write, ability to understand what makes a compelling story to you. And until we can address the effects of generative AI as they exist now, I don't think that we should just give in. The only reason that regulations for anything exist is because of backlash. If you stop caring about those things, that's when things get worse, right? And companies are already trying to push AI into everything. Okay, so as I did not notice, the mic died for several minutes, so I apologize for the very bad audio that you guys just had to endure for part of that question. Can you talk about revisions, keeping the story organized and not breaking it? What revisions look like when you're trying to make a first draft better? So this is just the way that I see writing. If you're going into especially a second draft, like you've only written one draft and you're figuring out what to fix and what to revise, I think it's actually important that you do break the story if you have to. If you have this instinct to be like, I don't want to like have to create so much work for myself, you're going to hold yourself back from potentially making a very important change that maybe the story needs. Again, just speaking about Local Heavens, I remember having this exact same reaction where multiple people were saying the same feedback. I would initially be like, I don't know if I want to make that change. Then that means it's going to change this, and that means it's going to change this. And it was only when I went down the thought of like, okay, if I do change this, this is how this plot line will play out. This is how this plot line will be strengthened. That's when I realized that breaking the story means being able to build it back into something that's better. There is this chaotic element to revision that writers have to learn how to embrace, and it does take a lot of practice. It takes a lot of courage, but it's not as scary as you think. I remember getting my first edit letter from my agent. It was like 14 pages long or something like that. You group revisions into tasks and it becomes a lot more manageable. You just have to think about it as, okay, this is the draft where I focus on these two things. And then on the next draft, I can worry about this thing. Revision becomes a lot less daunting when you see it that way. Things that you just, sometimes you need time away from the project to be like, okay, I see why this would make the book better. I did break my book, and I think that writers shouldn't be afraid to break their books. I think it does lead to some more very interesting things that you can explore in your story. The way to stay grounded and to make sure that you're not writing a book that you're no longer passionate about is to always have a mission statement with your story. So for me, it's my themes. Like every time I feel like, okay, should I make this change or not? I always go back to ultimately, what am I trying to say with the book? And am I still accomplishing that message? There were changes that I rejected. Most things I didn't, but there were sometimes like questions that would come up in editorial where I'd be like, I don't know if I want to make that change. I think it would stifle the energy of the project, but those are decisions that you make case to case basis. What elements did you need to know before attempting your first draft? I always need to know how my books end. Even if I don't know every step of the way, I need to know where I'm going. I usually focus on what is that one ending scene that I want to earn. And that really is like my prime motivator for projects, I think. The very ending scene of Local Heavens, I actually came up with that scene probably like just a few chapters into the first draft, and I was like, this needs to be the very last scene of the book. I never changed that scene because I had this very clear idea of how I wanted the book to end. For me, revision was just a process of asking myself, how do I earn that ending? How do I make that ending hit with more emotional impact every single draft? Other things that I feel like I need to know before I write are fears, desires, motivations of every character. So for Local Heavens specifically, because it's a retelling, what I did was I took the original novel and I annotated it, and then I took a chapter summary. I annotated the chapter summaries, and then I basically mapped every scene, every theme, motif, symbolism, character arc, plot moment, and I brainstormed a cyberpunk equivalent of it. And that's what helped me build out the world. I think world building can feel really shallow and one-dimensional if you don't connect details accordingly. And obviously you can't plan for everything. So there are things that I came up with in the world that I came up with on the spot as I was writing. But a lot of the major technology in the book, I always wanted it to have some kind of thematic relevance to the story. And those were the things that I thought about in advance before writing. So yeah, it's still a very like soft sci-fi novel in the sense that the technology isn't the point of the story, but I hope that all the technology has enough logic to it. It's believable in the context of the world. You talk a lot about being a theme-driven writer and how a book's message matters a lot to you. How do you handle the possibility of your work being misinterpreted or misunderstood, especially when you said you wrote Local Heavens about timely issues? I think like any author, regardless of what you write, you have to learn to accept that it's just like part of being an artist and it's part of selling art, where you cannot control what people are going to say about the art and you can't control what becomes of the book after you've stopped writing it. And I think cutting myself off from reading reviews directly helps me accept that whatever happens to the book from the moment that I stopped writing it is like out of my hands. In my mind, there is a draft of the book that belongs only to me. The story becomes something else. It's transformed by other people in other people's minds, and like they can have that version. So I think that's the first thing that I do to kind of handle the knowledge that, you know, some people will hate the book. I also though feel like the rejections that I got during querying and submission, that prepared me well for the eventual like 1-star reviews, whatever. I understand, you know, art is subjective. What I did while drafting though is I made a mental list, and I'm sure other authors do this, but I made a mental list of every possible bad thing that could be said about the book. I separated the phantom comments that I made up in my head into things that are worth editing and things that aren't. Be like, okay, there's going to be someone who says woke trash, or like, I wish this book was faster paced, or I wish it didn't state its themes so explicitly, or I wish it did state its themes more explicitly, whatever, right? These are broad examples because I'm generalizing. And I decided, okay, what can I address as best as I can without changing something fundamental to the book? And then I would think about like how much I wanted to change those things, and then what things weren't worth addressing at all, because that would just mean that, you know, whatever. If someone thinks that, they're just not my target audience. But that was kind of an exercise that I did with myself constantly when I was revising. You can't control ultimately what every person is going to think about the book, but you just try to do your best. You try to anticipate every possible thing someone could say and either make peace with it or try to edit it to rectify it. But one thing that I've talked about before is this idea of I don't like to write defensively. I don't like to write trying to think about the people that are going to hate the book. How did you get so good at line level craft? I am not easily satisfied. Like I get really, really finicky when I'm doing line edits. Like a fun fact about Local Heavens is that there was one of my favorite lines in the book was cut in like the last round of edits. If you have a physical arc, or if you read the book before NetGalley updated, that line was still in there, but in the final draft it's not there anymore because my proofreader just late in editorial was like, this line, maybe you want to change it for a sensitivity issue. And I remember I spent the whole day thinking about, should I change this line? I asked Rachel, Kelly, Lynn, my line is so good though. It was like one metaphor. And in the end, it just like, you kind of weigh the cost benefit of keeping the line in. And I was like, okay, it's not that important. So I think one element of getting better at line level writing is always thinking about like, how do I push the phrase further? And sometimes you push it too far and, you know, like, it's just like, okay, someone has to reel me back. But my current book that I'm writing is more commercial, and that's been a very interesting challenge because I've had to kind of pull myself away from this voice that I had gotten very comfortable in. But I think the challenge is kind of what keeps me motivated to write. I don't really know how I improved besides just like writing a lot of shitty drafts, reading a lot of the writing style that I want to imitate at any given time. I think there's this desire for writers to want to produce like perfect work immediately, but the truth is that the best stuff comes with time, you know? Writing poorly for me is like an essential part of the writing process. I think that's how I've gotten better. It's not, for me, it's not a part of the journey to be skipped. Having the courage to work through the shitty part of your book and also trusting yourself to get through it. Like, these are the things that I think make us better writers in general. With every project, I try to I pick who my favorite writers are in that genre. I found that I'm really sensitive to the sound of prose, like the way a sentence sounds. Oftentimes I let that guide me. Like, sometimes I know how I want a sentence to sound before I even know the exact words. Writing at the line level is a very musical experience for me. And I think that has really helped me. I saw your TikTok about the buy for buy love square. I don't think I've read one before. Given that love triangles are so hated, were you nervous to write something similar? Also, out of all the relationships, was there one you liked writing best/least? When I was initially drafting, I wasn't really thinking about any readers but myself. So I wouldn't say that I was nervous. I also don't think that Local Heavens is the kind of book where you're reading it to know who ends up with who or whatever. It's more so that every character isn't being fully honest. So you're waiting to see what will happen once everyone kind of learns each other's secrets. My favorite dynamic to write was Nick and Jordan. I probably shouldn't say that because, like, you know, it makes Gatsby sound less important, and Nick and Gatsby is like, you know, is like the central relationship in the book. I choose Nick and Jordan because they were the easiest one to write. Like, Fitzgerald just built such an interesting character with her. Any iteration of Jordan Baker is going to be very interesting because she's just so fun. I expanded Jordan's character a lot in Local Heavens. She is, to me, like equal to Gatsby as like a second lead. And I think she and Nick in this book really ground each other. In my mind, Nick and Jordan, their relationship is the one that kind of ricochets the most throughout the story. Like, it's fun, it's vulnerable, comedic, it's difficult. Of course, like, I don't want to tell readers how to feel, so you can interpret it any way you want. But for me, like, as I was writing them, these versions of Nick and Jordan they have a connection that I think can't easily be summed up as romantic, sexual, platonic. Like, it's all of it. Yeah, I think they really just exist between the lines. Did your fellow writing community expand with your book, with your pub deal? Yes, it definitely did. I think that's the coolest thing that comes with becoming an author. I feel like I've just made so many amazing friends and connections. Obviously, a lot of authors blurbed this book and they came through for me, and like, that was just an incredibly cool experience, like getting to connect with authors that I've just really looked up to, and I'm just so grateful to them. I get to read books early more, which is really cool. For all of the bad rap that book talk gets, and, you know, sometimes we see drama and we think that that's the entire community. In my experience, like, I've just had the most amazing, compassionate experiences with authors. Like, authors are so kind. I'm just very grateful to the community as a whole for like amplifying each other. Did not getting a Big Five deal cause you any disappointment? I think if this book was a more commercial book, if I was writing a fantasy book or something like that, but I went into the submission process for Local Heavens with very conservative expectations, and I also went in at that point, I had felt I was already very jaded by the industry. So because Local Heavens is a literary sci-fi book, I didn't necessarily have those expectations from it. Everything happens for a reason. Love my publisher, love what they've done for me, have really treated this book with all of the attention and care that I hoped it would get. Every book is going to be different, and I fully believe that Local Heavens like found the home that it was meant to find. Okay, so yes, it is a new day. I had to split up the filming of this video into 2 days because I was having so many technical issues. How did already having a platform affect your marketing plan, and how much did the publisher help with promotion? So first of all, like my platform is really small, and I know like something is better than nothing, and I don't like discount that, you know, having done YouTube for 4 years hasn't had some kind of positive impact. I don't really think a platform is like really appealing or impactful to publishers unless it's like big, unless you're like a Luke Bateman situation, right? So I don't think that being a content creator was necessarily something that affected at least the acquisition process. It's hard to say whether or not having a platform is something that like my publisher was really putting into their marketing plan. I think specifically with my US publisher, I remember them telling me that, you know, we don't expect our authors to be content creators. They never told me at any point like, hey, you need to make content, you need to be promoting your book. As far as communication goes, I haven't had any issues. In terms of how much did my publisher help with promotion, I would say that my publisher has gone above and beyond what I had expected and above and beyond what I think other publishers might have given me. I obviously compare notes with you know, other authors. Bindery, they're very author forward and they're very transparent in their communication. I have really just like loved every person that I have worked with on the team, editorial to production to marketing and publicity, accommodating. Everyone is so willing to answer questions. I find that because I have heard some like truly nightmarish stories from other authors in terms of like the way that they're being treated, the difficult kind of communication issues that people have had. It has been really night and day to my own experience, because I think with a bigger publisher, if I were like making assumptions, imagine with a different publisher, they might have just kind of said like, well, this book is never going to be commercial hit. It's never going to be like a Fourth Wing type of situation. We don't really see the need to divert resources to it. Pre-order campaigns are usually something that authors have to do completely by themselves. Again, unless you're like a lead title. Bindery really like supports every book's pre-order campaign. Didn't really have to like, they help brainstorm it, they pay for it, create it, fulfill the orders. How did you start writing a high concept or weird story that blends different genres? Where do you start with the writing process without feeling too overwhelmed? Okay, I'm just jumping in really quick because the way that I answered the question for this video was kind of off topic. This question was specifically asking, how did I approach writing a genre bendy story? The truth is that I never really consciously thought about the way that I was blending genres as I was writing. So I don't think I ever actually felt overwhelmed while I was writing. The way that I answered the question was more about publishing, because that is when I felt overwhelmed. I really just wrote intuitively. And now in hindsight, I can sort of identify that the story is a mix of, you know, speculative literary fiction, sort of social commentary type sci-fi, mixed with cyberpunk dystopia, cyberpunk thriller, mixed with love story romance. I didn't really, as I was writing, break down those genres and be like, okay, this is the kind of story that I'm writing. Maybe it's helpful for some writers to break it down in that way, but for me, I think I feel a lot freer when I'm just not thinking about labels. For me, it's always been more helpful to think about what are the works that inspire this story and what elements do I really like from those works? What am I pulling, and why/how am I blending those things? The intersection of all of those works that inspire you, thinking about how, like, what that intersection is and why it interests you so much. And I think that's where the heart of a story really lives. But if it stresses you out to think about like, how am I blending it? Like if you're thinking so consciously about it, I think that's kind of where writers can feel overwhelmed. I hope that's helpful. How did you decide that the floating house would be your next project after Local Heavens? I developed the idea for the floating house when I was still querying Local Heavens. I wanted to write something new. I didn't want to get too comfortable in one genre, and I knew that something like The Floating House, the idea was not only more marketable as a fantasy project, it was also very different. Part of it was publishing pressure, but I think also the other part of it was I wanted a craft challenge. Like, I get bored very easily. I needed to write something that I felt like was really different. It was a mix of marketability, my interest in the idea, or like the magic system of The Floating House it was very appealing to me. I didn't want to lock myself down into an author brand like so early. I wanted to be able to establish myself and prove to myself that I could hop around genres. As someone who wants to write sci-fi, does a sci-fi novel have to be specific in terms of the science? My favorite part of sci-fi is what could technology do as hypotheticals, having a futuristic setting. I don't know if I'm cut out for sci-fi. Like, if you think about the scope of fantasy, there is such a range. Babel is not the same as ACOTAR, is not the same as Game of Thrones. There's this misconception that science fiction has to be a certain way. Local Heavens is not a hard science fiction book. Science fiction in the sense that the technology is built to be in service of the character arcs and the themes. The world building is built to support the themes. When I think of a hard science fiction book, I think of a book that readers read specifically for the science itself. With Local Heavens, I had some key questions I was interested in. I built the technology around those key questions. So, how does the cost of living crisis or the housing crisis or, parasocial relationships, what does that look like in a cyberpunk world? What does that look like in a cyberpunk Gatsby world? Still make the science logical and believable within the context of the world, but it's not a book that you go into thinking like, what are all of these specific components of a net running rig? I think if there's an idea for a technology or a question that you're interested in and you are intimidated to maybe write an entire book around it, you can do what I did, which was to write a short story first. So if you have been following me for a couple years, you might remember the publication of my first short story, which was Sway With Me Until We Bleed. It was published with Augur. Writing Sway With Me helped me play around with like atmosphere of what kind of cyberpunk stories I was interested in. What is the feeling you hope will linger with readers after they have finished Local Heavens? This is such a beautiful question because I don't think I've ever been asked this before. I want readers to feel like that moment in their life when maybe they have felt the angriest, saddest, most cynical they've ever felt about the world and or about themselves. And then something comes along when you least expect it, when you're at your lowest point. That thing, even though it's really small, is something that unexpectedly gives you this new surge of hope in not just yourself, not just in your future, but in a future for the world. Despite everything that I've experienced, maybe this world still has something worthy of saving. So this world is still worthy of living in. I think that's what's really appealing about trying to find the hopeful parts of dystopia, because you're obviously writing about the world at its most cruel and you're trying to usher your characters towards still having a sense of hope. And I think Nick, as much as anyone in the book, is very flawed, makes questionable decisions depending on how you feel. There's also this feeling while I was writing the ending where the story expands its dialogue. For me, it felt like you are seeing not just the Local Heavens version of Nick and Gatsby. You're also feeling the spirit of Fitzgerald's Nick and Gatsby and all of the other incarnations that they have lived and have yet to live. If someone could close the book and feel like they could pick up the 1925 Great Gatsby, they could go see the play on Broadway, they could pick up another retelling, or they could watch the movie, it would feel like a sequel. It would feel like all of these stories are connected and all of the incarnations of these characters are connected. I was also asked, will Local Heavens be available in libraries? Yes, you just have to ask your library to stock it, like request the title, and there's enough interest in a title, they will stock it. So hopefully your library stocks it, and if they don't, make sure you ask. I would love to have Local Heavens in as many libraries as possible. My local library has a request form online, but if they don't have that, you can also probably go into your branch and just like ask them about it. So we answered quite a few questions. Thank you for indulging this Q&A. If you want to pre-order the book, you can do that wherever you buy your books. I will have all of that linked below. Signed and personalized copies are available from Queen Books in Toronto and You and Me Books in New York. We will be launching Local Heavens in New York at You and Me Books. So I'm so happy and honored to be joined by Christina Lee. We will be in conversation at You and Me on October 16th. So if you're in the New York area, please come out. I would love to say hi. I would love to meet you guys. Just keep an eye out on my socials. I will be announcing some more things. Thank you so much for supporting Local Heavens, for pre-ordering it. It makes such a massive difference. I hope all your writing projects are going well. I'll see you guys in the next video.